Hello everyone, Phreak here. Welcome to my patch 8.6 rundown. This one's going to be a pretty exciting patch, and even though it's very long, I don't think it's as big as the other even-numbered patches. There are a lot of changes, but they shouldn't mean terribly much for the game. That said, maybe it will mean a huge difference in gameplay at the end of the day. But I think it's a pretty good patch. I want to point out what this means for competitive. It means nothing for North America and Europe competitive. They are going to remain on 8.5 for their playoffs all the way up until they qualify for MSI. For China and Korea, to the best of my knowledge, their playoff patch is going to be this one, 8.6. And because it's a follow-up patch after the Kaisa release, just like at 8.5, they have Kaisa enabled. Considering that 8.6 has what I think are very big Kaisa buffs, this, could very well be a common pick in those regional playoffs, and so we'll see what happens there. Beyond that, MSI is going to be somewhere between like 8.7 and 8.9. It's around that area. I think mid-season might be 8.9 or 8.10, so that's kind of the general timeline of patches. Just so you guys know, and I don't know what the playoff patch is for the other regions, but there you go, that kind of stuff going on. So one of the big broad strokes that is happening this patch, however, is that Duskblade of Drakthar is getting some changes. The base damage, if you're melee, is going down from by 35 to 110, which is of course pretty substantial. And the range damage is going down by 15 to 100. Now the damage is flatly 30 plus 10 per level, as opposed to these numbers from before. Of course, you're not going to buy a Duskblade in the first few levels of the game. That's just simply not going to happen until around level 8 or so. And so the minus 15 never really happens. It's closer to the minus 100 mark. However, it does get some nice buffs. If you're melee, you instantly kill a trap or a ward that's disabled by blackout, which is really nice because now it means while you're roaming, you just get to one-shot those wards and keep going. Also, if you have an Oracles turned on, it won't turn on blackout so that you can basically not waste it, which, of course can be useful as well. So that's kind of nice. That's a nice thing to have. So let's talk about the fact that with this item being generally nerfed, though, because the damage is an incredibly important part of the item, a bunch of champions are getting compensation. And the way they did this is the design team, to the best of my knowledge, looked at a bunch of statistics and said, okay, these are the champions that bought Duskblade frequently, and if they weren't buying Duskblade, were generally weak. Like if they had a great secondary item anyway, like if Yomu's first was as good as Duskblade first, they were like, you know what, those champions are fine, let's move on. But if Duskblade was by far their best first item, then they did this and they gave the champions compensation buffs. So Graves is getting some buffs. And I did some thinking, and here's the math, by the way, on Duskblade for what it's worth. The damage is cut by 1/3 if you're range, and again, there's the 45 to 100 damage cutoff from, actual meaningful levels. And for the melee champions, you're losing more like 2/5 of the damage off the item, and it's pretty meaningful. So obviously, again, there's some meaningful damage. You're losing, 70-ish damage in your all-ins, and that damage needs to be added back to your kit somehow. Otherwise, you're just simply weaker, right? It's not like Ash was making use of Duskblade, but Zed certainly was, so what happens? Okay, so let's talk about what's going on here. So Graves got some extra attack damage growth, and he got some extra magic resist growth, and his W casts a bit faster, and the vision reduction applies more quickly. Okay, so W is a bit more usable. That's cool. I can't really quantify that in any meaningful way, but I'm sure that will help Graves a little bit. As far as the AD and MR growth, here's the attack damage growth. It is, by the end of the game, a 9% damage bump, and this, to me, gets in pretty scary levels of attack damage. I don't like... So, basically, I like when base stats are meaningfully different across classes. Like I've said this in other rundowns before, I like when Juggernaut types have like 140 or more attack damage at the end of the game, because that feels like they're hitting very beefy, strong hits late in the game, and that feels appropriate. That even if they didn't build any damage, they were behind or whatever, they got to have a lot of attack damage. Graves get up to 120, and yes, he's partially a Juggernaut, sort of, right? He's playing in kind of melee ranges. He's got to be kind of durable. That starts to encroach on wonky base stats to me, but whatever. I want to point out his Q and R are both bonus AD ratios, so the base attack damage changes don't affect his spell damage at all. But with his base damage going up to almost 10 more, Duskblade would only trigger once in a fight, generally speaking, so after a few autos you get more damage out of it. That feels like a fairly appropriate damage compensation, because keep in mind also his base AD is going to affect his jungle clear, it's going to affect his dueling levels 1 through 7 before Duskblade ever comes online, and so this feels like a fairly appropriate compensation. That seems pretty reasonable. As far as the Magic's growth is concerned, I kind of thought about this for a while because initially I was like, well, wait a second, Graves used to have bonus MR just on his quick draw, and why not just add that back? Why not just keep, why not just re-add the quick draw magic resist? But in my opinion, it kind of makes sense this way because Graves is half a juggernaut. He's a very, very short-range marksman. Explicitly by design. I think it actually makes sense that his base stats actually line up and get closer to melee champion base stats, and so it kind of made sense to me. It's a 1 to 6% durability increase against magic damage, being that he's mostly a jungler. The early levels don't matter at all until you get at least level 3 when you actually find champions in the game, and so the fact that it means nothing at level 1 actually means basically nothing at all. He's slightly healthier taking Gromp, which is kind of cool, but yeah, he's a bit more durable in a team fight. That's kind of nice. Does a bit more damage in long team fights as well, and that's cool. And either way, he was still pretty good going Warrior Black Cleaver, so it's not like he's losing that much by forsaking Duskblade. Generally speaking, it was going to be just fine. So some buffs to Kayn. A simple bonus attack damage ratio bump on both W and blue R. This is specifically for the Assassin R. As it stood, Kayn was definitely not doing